Hello, my name is Shriver. Thank you for watching my 2021 Capstone Symposium presentation. Our project is titled Internet Freedom and Human Rights Violations. This study addresses the research question, does the quality of internet freedom affect the number of human rights violations that occur within a country? Now, I theorize that the internet, when left uncensored, provides a platform from which citizens may educate one another on crimes committed by their government. Now, the pressure of public oversight through a medium as fast and as well connected as the internet would sway government leaders away from universally immoral violations of human rights. As stated by Frank LaRue in his 2011 address to the UN Committee on Human Rights, indeed, the recent wave of demonstrations in countries across the Middle East and North African region has shown the key role that the internet can play in mobilizing the population to call for justice, equality, accountability, and a better respect for human rights. There are several studies that explored the capabilities of the internet and its role in civil society. One collection of articles from 2016 titled Human Rights and the Internet expresses an optimistic sentiment towards the utility of the internet as a tool for the continuing advocacy for human rights. This is apparent in the riff of the old adage, the pen is mightier than the sword, the mouse is now mightier than the missile. Overall, with greater freedom on the internet, fewer human rights violations will occur. This relationship will be represented as a declining linear regression flowing from a low level of internet freedom and a high number of human rights violations to a high level of internet freedom and a resulting low tolerance for human rights violations. In order to test this theory, two data sources were chosen. To represent internet freedom, the Freedom House Freedom on the Net 2020 overall score was used. This score is made up of three categories to include obstacles to access worth 25 points. Obstacles to access includes the infrastructure, economic hurdles, government policy, as well as the regulation and ownership of internet service providers within a country. Limits on content worth 35 points include censorship, as well as the regulation and filtering of online tools for civic mobilization. Finally, violations of user rights worth 40 points includes legal protections or the lack thereof, free speech, privacy, and the severity of punishment for online activity. Now, data for internet freedom is fairly straightforward. However, it is actually rather difficult to assess the human rights track record of a nation. This is especially true when nations who commit human rights violations may attempt to conceal these violations from the greater international community. Other obstacles include the variance of human rights definitions, variance in system of governance, variance in the method of data collection, as well as bias in data collection. And these variances can occur between countries as well as within a single institution attempting to collect data on human rights. To address these concerns, this study relied upon the multilateral capability of the United Nations, specifically the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Under this office, the Universal Human Rights Index is maintained. This is a repository that records guidance issued by human rights monitoring mechanisms within the UN, to include the Universal Periodic Review, the UN Human Rights Council, the UN General Assembly, the Security Council, and the Secretary General. One example of a recommendation used from within this index is a recommendation brought forward by Finland citing the United States for its continued use of capital punishment, stating to abstain from further use of capital punishment after the regrettable resumption of the federal death penalty, which is inhuman and violates a person's right to life. Now, this recommendation represents a human rights violation that the United States committed. In this way, I hoped that recommendations would serve as an adequate proxy for violations. Therefore, my independent variable will be freedom on the net overall country score, representing internet freedom, and then my dependent variable will be the number of Universal Human Rights Index recommendations received per country, serving as a proxy for human rights violations. This descriptive statistics table shows data on each variable. The lowest received freedom on the net score was for the People's Republic of China, and the highest score was a 95 for Iceland. This range of 85 denotes a huge disparity in uninhibited access to the internet. The lowest number of human rights recommendations received was for Libya, and the highest number received is in Sri Lanka. This scatter plot shows every point plotted up along an x-axis of freedom on the net overall score and a y-axis of human rights index recommendations. If the predicted hypothesis of this study were visible, we would see a trend, a line of best fit flowing in a negative direction and a strong negative correlation. However, as you can see, the line of best fit is rather centered, and then R-squared value is slightly positive of 0.0093. In addition, Freedom on the Net, Freedom House also designates countries into a category of free, partly free, or not free. In order to fully evaluate the spread of recommendations, I developed a categorical variable of A, B, and C, as you can see on the left. These two categorical variables were then evaluated within a chi-square test, resulting in a p-value of 0.99 and a confidence interval of less than 90%. A confidence interval of less than 90% translates to a rejection of the alternative hypothesis presented in this paper and an acceptance of the null hypothesis of no correlation. Overall, the data analyzed in this study does not provide evidence to support the stated hypothesis, as we saw with a weak regression line, a weak positive regression line, as well as a chi-square p-value of 0.99 and a confidence interval of less than 90%. Freedom on the Net overall score, therefore, does not directly correlate with UN Universal Human Rights Index number of recommendations received. Confounding factors in this study include the difference between recommendations and violations. Now, recommendations may not be an indicator of abuse by a ruling state, but rather evidence of a healthy civil society with substantial connections to the greater international community. This is different than a direct measure for human rights violations. Other factors that influence this study include duration of regime, type of government, and level of participation within the UN, which all may affect the number of recommendations a country receives. In conclusion, there remains considerable evidence that a free internet plays a significant role in human rights advocacy. Further research into this topic should identify a direct measure of human rights violations. One way to do this would be to utilize a case study approach to each country, examining news sources, NGOs, watchdog institutions, among others, to develop a reliably representative proxy measure for human rights violations. This has been my presentation. Thank you for watching.